And there's a quote from you guys know how big a Anthony Bourdain fan I am. His quote says, "Good food is very often, even most often, simple food." And that applies to cities too. The best cities aren't over-engineered. They're authentic. Dining out used to be a treat. I remember growing up, we would go out to dinner maybe, I'd say once a month, probably, maybe twice a month, and it would be really fun. It'd be a big thing, but it was not a part of our normal day-to-day lives. And now, it varies state to state, but in many states, it's the default. They're authentic. That's why people love Europe. Right? Europe isn't convenient. They don't have air conditioning half the places, but it just feels so raw and authentic. They let the local character shine through, whether it's a diner, a bar, or a bistro tucked in a little alleyway. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Saucetown Investor Podcast. I am your host, Matt Cox, back with a solo episode today on island time, spending the day here in Puerto Rico with my fiance's family, and then headed to St. Barth's tomorrow. You can see, if you're on video, you can see the tank top and the hat. I am in beach mode, but we are hitting you with another episode. And this one kind of came about, like a lot of my ideas do, just through a conversation. And I kind of came to the realization that years ago, think back 10, 15 years, there was not good food in every single city. And today, we used to talk about food cities. It feels like today, everywhere in America is a food city. You go to a small town, big town, everybody has good food. And so the episode title today is How Did Everywhere Become a Food City? And there was a time when only a handful of cities were known for their food. Think New York, San Francisco, Chicago, probably New Orleans. Shout out to Nola, was there back in June. But everywhere else, you went out to eat, sure, but it was more about convenience or just having a night out than it was about creativity or fine dining. And today that's completely flipped. You can go to almost any, think mid-sized city in America, like Charleston or Boise. I went to Savannah, Georgia recently. I've heard Omaha, Nebraska, I was doing some research, has a great food scene now. And then of course, Salem, the place I grew up. I remember going to like the Ram Brewery for you go get a good burger or whatever, but there was not a big food scene. But you can go to these places now and you can find inventive chefs, craft breweries, boutique bakeries, and restaurants that could frankly hold their own in some of those big cities that I named previously. So what happened? How did everywhere become a food city? There's a number of factors, and we'll talk through it. I did kind of went down a rabbit hole on this. But if you've, like I said, I grew up in Salem. If you've lived in Salem, I don't live there anymore. But when I go back, you notice the transformation firsthand. And honestly, Salem's kind of a poster child for this. And there's tons of cities where this has happened across the country. But 10 years ago, or maybe 10 to 15 ago, there were a handful of local institutions, right? Solid spots. They were usually family run, predictable, right? Now there's like food halls, there's multiple breweries, there's artisan pizza joints that you could throw into Brooklyn and nobody would think twice about it. And then there's like chefs that used to cook in Portland and are now running like farm to table in downtown Salem. Shout out Cozy Taberna. And that story isn't unique to Salem, certainly. It's happening in virtually every city in the country. And the reasons why tell us a lot about a number of things, such as culture, economics, and community, and the way that they've evolved over the last 20 years. So let's talk about the first and maybe the most obvious reason. The internet and social media have changed taste and what matters to people completely. So before Instagram or before food blogs or before Yelp, great food was mostly local knowledge. You had to live in a place or travel there to even know what was special. You had to go around, do your own research. Now a viral Instagram post or TikTok post can put a taco truck in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or a bakery in Boise, Idaho on the map overnight. I mean, we see it time and time again. And when everyone has a camera and has a platform, which everyone does now, especially, people have large platforms. Somebody has 10,000 followers, they can make or break your business. And whether that's good or not is a whole nother conversation. But the reality is they can. And this causes the standards to rise. People now know what a good ramen bowl looks like. They know what seared scallops or wild fermentation mean. Like, nobody would have known this stuff years ago, but the social media's put it out there. And that collective exposure to, frankly, good food everywhere, all over the world, all at once on these social channels pushes diners, customers to expect more, and local chefs have to deliver on it. So, according to the National Restaurant Association, US restaurant and food service sales are projected to hit 1.5 trillion this year in 2025. And that's up from roughly 1.1 trillion just a few years ago. So rough math, what is that? That's over a 33% jump. So over a third that's the restaurant sales have gone up by. And there are now more than 1,000 restaurant establishments operating across the country. So you think about that, that's a lot of competition, a lot of restaurants going in and out of business, and it pushes people to be better. And that scale alone tells you this isn't a niche movement. It's become a large part of the national economy. I mean, dining out used to be a treat. I remember growing up, we would go out to dinner maybe, I'd say once a month, probably maybe twice a month, and it would be really fun. It'd be a big thing, but it was not a part of our normal day-to-day lives. And now, it varies state to state, but in many states, it's the default. So here's an example. In Washington, D.C. now, over 75% of all food spending happens away from home. And in Nevada and Hawaii, which these are admittedly kind of entertainment-heavy states, it's over 60%. So Americans are eating out more than ever before, and not just in big cities. Okay, the second driver of this is that chefs started to spread out. 20 years ago, if you wanted to make it as a chef in America, you had to move to LA, New York, or San Francisco, maybe some of those others I named, NOLA or Chicago. But that's where the Michelin stars were, and that's where the media attention and the restaurant, this is important, the restaurant investors were. And because of this, you could go make an awesome restaurant in, I keep coming back to Salem because it's where it's from, and it might be great, but you're not going to get any attention for it. Now with social media, it's everywhere. So these chefs started to spread out, but those same cities have become very difficult to operate in, those New York, LA, and San Francisco types. And the reasons are labor costs, rent, and regulations have gotten brutal. So think a young chef, and I work in real estate, but I'm in residential, so I don't know I had to do some research on this and to understand what retail and restaurant space goes for. But a young chef trying to open a restaurant in Manhattan might face $200 per square foot in rent before the first plate ever even leaves the kitchen. And I saw this living 4 years in East Village, which is, by my biased account, maybe the best food neighborhood in America. Restaurants would go out of business so constantly. I mean, I would leave town for a week and come back, and a block with half of it would look different, or a street that I hadn't walked on in a while. I would go down, or an avenue, and I would be like, oh my God, like this place went out of business, but these two new ones went in. It is brutal. So the economics are tough. And so what do you do when it becomes this difficult? Sometimes it means that you leave and they go to places like a Salem or a Spokane, Washington, or a Des Moines, Iowa, where rent is a fraction of that, and where the community, because they've seen what good food looks like on blogs and Yelp, and of course on social media, is eager for something new, and where they can actually own their restaurant. For the chefs, they can actually own it instead of just being trapped in debt trying to survive every day. So in a sense, the food scene decentralized in the same way that remote work did, right? We figured out you can work from anywhere. Chefs now have figured out they can create world-class food anywhere, and the economics might be better, actually, if they get out of one of these major food hubs, such as New York. So talent stopped just clustering in a few places, and once you have a few talented chefs setting up shop in smaller cities, it creates an ecosystem, right? Suppliers and farms and craft producers, and then a trained workforce of service workers starts to spring up around them. It's like we talk about markets a lot on this podcast. It's like any other market. People start to crowd into it. Momentum gets going, and all of a sudden people go, oh, wait, I can run, a 5-star restaurant in Salem, Oregon. You just need the proof of concept. And then, that starts to snowball on top of itself, and other cities do it, or more restaurants open in the city where a really good restaurant has already opened. So that brings us to the local ingredient revolution. And I hadn't really thought about this one, but for decades, chefs outside of major metros actually struggled to get access to high quality ingredients, right? High quality ingredients equals high quality, tasty food. And nowadays, logistics have caught up on this. I mean, shout out to Amazon, but also in other places in the economy. Overnight shipping, regional distributors, and cold chain systems mean fresh seafood can get from the coast to the Midwest in a day. Now, I was in Wisconsin last week. I didn't have any seafood actually, but is the seafood in Wisconsin going to be as good as Maine? No, it's not, but it can at least hold its own and not be, frankly, disgusting. So, and a lot of this stuff, like we talked about, it's kind of a chicken or the egg. Did the regional distribution arrive there because the restaurants were there, or did the restaurants arrive there because the regional distribution got there? The answer, frankly, probably doesn't matter that much, but you get the point. You can get good food and ingredients almost anywhere overnight now. And then at that same time, small scale farming has totally exploded. The number of farmers markets in the US has more than quadrupled since 1994, from about 1,700 to over 8,000 today. I mean, think about it. If you're listening to this, I guarantee your town, if you're in a tiny town, you probably still have one farmer's market. If you're in a decent sized town, you've got a bunch of them. So local sourcing isn't, we've always heard like farm to table, organic, free range, all that. Then those are kind of, depending on who you ask, those are kind of marketing angles. But in this case, it's a real logistical thing. Like, we really can go farm to table because small farms and farmers markets have popped up all over the place. I mean, think about Oregon. That trend is especially visible, right? Wineries in the Willamette Valley, which, shout out, I'm not a wine connoisseur, let's be honest, but I have friends that are really into wine, and the Willamette Valley is hyped right now. It's becoming the new Napa Valley because it's like 95% of the quality at half the price. And so we have these wineries in the Willamette Valley that supply restaurants all across the state with world-class wine. And then we've got ranches, I'm doing this all in the context of Oregon, but we've got ranches east of the Cascades that ship directly to Salem's kitchens. Mills and cheesemakers have all built direct relationships with a lot of these chefs and delivered these awesome ingredients that equal, of course, awesome food. So it becomes its own local economy inside of the local economy. And then there's migration, another factor. People used to move to cities for jobs, and there's still truth to that. People do move to cities for jobs, but now a lot of people do move for lifestyle reasons. So during and after the pandemic, millions of Americans left expensive metros for smaller, more livable cities. And that influx brought people with disposable income and some expensive taste in some cases. If you move from, say, San Francisco, a lot of people left the Bay or even New York during COVID. Now they're starting to repopulate, and that's trending in the wrong direction. But not the wrong direction, the other direction. But think back to that. If you move from San Fran to, say, Salem, or from Brooklyn, New York to Boise, Idaho, you didn't leave that your expensive high-end palate behind. You have expectations for good food. And so those transplants wanted artisan coffee, craft cocktails, sourdough bread, and a chef-driven restaurant for date night. And local entrepreneurs responded to that.
Hey guys, we're taking a quick break, but before we get back into it,
If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us to keep bringing you more valuable content. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't forget to leave a review. Please, it makes a huge difference. All right, let's get back to it. So Salem, for example, has seen a steady rise in population over the past decade. I'm really in tune with this because I invest in Salem and I'm from there. Up roughly 12% since 2010. And with it, a new class of professionals who work remotely or maybe commute part-time to Portland have moved there. And that hybrid lifestyle supports businesses that once wouldn't have survived in a smaller market. I mean, look at downtown. I remember when downtown Salem had to shut down all the bars at 11 p.m. on weekends because it was just a cesspool, frankly. There were fights breaking out. There were very few cool places to go. No disrespect to Magoo's and the Brick, of course, but downtown Salem was not a cool place. Nobody lived down there. Now you go down there, there's modern apartments going up. You know the places. Amadeus has been there a long time, but like Cozy Taberna, I'm blanking on Victory. Like these are places that just were not there back in the day. Salem's a perfect example of this. Something else shifted as well, and this is more of a cultural thing, but food has kind of become identity. Now, what do I mean by that? Dining out isn't just about nourishment or getting out with loved ones or friends or whatever. It is an act of self-expression. Think about it. I'm guilty of this as anybody. I'm not judging. People photograph their food, they review it, and they share it. It's a signal, right? If you're eating at a high-end restaurant, you're signaling like, look at me. I can I can afford this. I'm having a great time. Look how cool I am. And cities have picked up on that. And so when a local tourism board used to pitch itself, they might highlight things like museums or sports teams, which I love sports as much as the next guy. But now they lead with food sometimes. Slogans like, come taste the city, or get a taste of PDX, or it's branding and it works. I mean, I'll give you a few examples. Charleston's entire modern reputation was built on food. I mean, what do you think of when you think of Charleston, South Carolina? Maybe bachelor and bachelorette parties to a certain extent, but it's a food city, and it's a perfect example because I went there a couple of years ago. I couldn't tell you how many people I talked to who were former New Yorkers and had migrated to Charleston and opened restaurants. It felt like I was only there 3 days, but half the places I ate at, they were like, I used to live in New York. I came here and opened this restaurant. I mean, think about Nashville, like the hot chicken scene, which I love food. I'm not a huge hot chicken guy, I gotta be honest, but everybody talks about it. Go get the Nashville hot chicken, and they have all kinds of incredible food there. We went, a little over a year ago. I've been a handful of times. Incredible food scene. And then Portland's food carts, right? Portland's food carts are part of the PDX identity. And of course, before my Portland people get upset with me, I know Portland has a crazy fine dining scene as well. I mean, shout out Tusk, shout out Ox, shout out Le Pigeon. I could go on. Portland is a world-class food city, but the food carts are part of what makes it cool, because you can get fine dining in Portland, but you can also go spend $15 at a food cart and get an amazing meal as well. And then, Salem has quietly followed suit, but, positioning itself as Oregon's emerging food hub. So if you zoom out a little bit, this all ties into economics. It's America, right? Capitalism, turn and burn. Show me the money, baby. Shout out Willie Beeman. So if you zoom out, it's economics. Restaurants are not just cultural assets, they're job engines. And the restaurant industry employs nearly 16 million Americans, one of the largest private sector workforces in the country. And remember, our population, I think, is a little over 300 million, but only, I think, under 200 million are actually employed because of kids and unemployed and retired people. So that's, I don't have the exact numbers, but probably close to 10% of the workforce is employed by restaurants. And so when a good food scene develops, it doesn't just feed the population, it attracts more population. Neighborhoods with great restaurants see higher property values, more tourism, and better small business retention. It's the kind of a halo effect around food. And in urban economics, there's actually a term for it. They call it placemaking, or we'll talk about investing in the path of progress. You take a neighborhood, or gentrification is another word for it. You take a neighborhood that maybe wasn't the most sought after, and then all of a sudden a nice restaurant goes in, and then entrepreneur sees that and goes, you know what, I could open a cool coffee shop next door. And then someone else sees in it, and they say I could open an artisan bakery next door, and it all just starts to compound on itself. It's when you make a place people want to visit, they start to want to stay there. How many people? I'm a perfect example. I visited New York because I wanted to visit it, and I stayed because I loved it. And restaurants are not the only factor, of course, but they are a big first step. And so you see this play out again in Salem's downtown. 10 years ago, many of these storefronts were vacant or super divey or even underutilized. And today there's breweries, restaurants, coffee shops everywhere. Once foot traffic increases, retail and real estate follow, right? The former Salem Mall just got bought up. Like I talked about, there's nice modern apartments going in down there. That none of that existed 10, 15 years ago. So good restaurants can lead to foot traffic, which leads to investment, which leads to a community identity, which eventually leads to growth, and that's population growth, economic growth. It's a virtuous cycle. And so that's why cities now actively court chefs in fine dining. It's why mayors talk about food scenes the way they talk about tech in some ways. People are always like, enter city here. We've got a tech scene, which is kind of just a buzzword now because everybody has a tech scene. It's just tech is so ingrained in our lives. There's no way you can't have a tech scene, but you get my point. Because having a vibrant food ecosystem is a magnet to the city and a magnet toward the economics of a city. So let's put a few more numbers behind this. According to OpenTable, the number of seated diners in 2025 is up 22% compared to pre-pandemic 2019 levels in mid-sized US cities. That's a big jump. And again, the data is from 2019, pre-COVID. Meanwhile, this is staggering. In the largest metros like New York and San Francisco, growth has been flatter, closer to 6 to 8%. Now, in fairness, these cities were already at higher levels, but you get the point. The playing field is starting to level, and everybody has a good food scene now. And that's a big deal. It means smaller cities are catching up in both volume of food and variety of food. And Wallet Hub recently ranked best foodie cities across America. Some of the factors were like diversity, accessibility, and affordability. And out of the top 25, more than half were not major metros. So there was places like Tampa, Vegas, Miami, New York, Austin, Portland that were near the top of the list. Those are major metros. But there were others like Madison, Wisconsin, Boise, Idaho, Cincinnati, Ohio that weren't far behind on the list. So the new food map, there's still these hubs in the large metros, but it's much more democratized than it used to be. Now, here's an interesting part for investors and urbanists alike. Food scenes aren't just following population growth, they're predicting it. So when restaurants start to cluster, it's often an early sign that a neighborhood or a city is about to take off. So a great example for my Oregonians is the Central East Side in Portland. Okay, 15 years ago, it was mostly just warehouses. You didn't really go down there. And today it's a dense mix of restaurants, breweries, and then of course that leads to jobs. So you got tech startups down there. Think of Salem. Think of Salem's equivalent downtown core. So we've got things when Barrel and Keg and Rudy's and Venti's started drawing crowds, other businesses took note. Those were kind of the OGs, right? That was the fine dining before the rush of fine dining came into Salem. So then come investments in streetscapes and then apartments and co-working spaces, and food becomes the spark for all of that. Now, before we get too far here, not everything is rosy in the restaurant world. Restaurants are notoriously cutthroat, difficult businesses, and margins are thin. I always say, like, it would be so cool to own a restaurant, but I don't think I have the energy for it. And frankly, it's not the way to make a lot of money. You got to just like truly love food. Not to say that no one can, but it is a hard business. So margins are thin and costs, particularly labor, right, have risen faster than menu prices in many markets, right? With inflation, food prices have gone up, but wages among service workers have gone way up as well. And so you look at those menus now, you get sticker shock sometimes. These items that you were used to paying one price a handful of years ago, they've gone through the roof, but that's not for no reason. It's because they have to pay their staff more because their ingredients cost more. So food inflation in 2024 ran about 4%, and wages for hospitality workers are up nearly 10%. So do the math there. It doesn't work. You have to figure out a way to compensate for that, frankly. And if you don't, you're not going to have a business. So while diners are getting more quality, many restaurateurs are getting squeezed. And that tension shows up in pricing and accessibility. A city might have a great food scene, but if the median entree is $40, that scene might not serve everyone. Still, even with those challenges, the overall trajectory is clear. The average quality of dining in America has never been higher, and the geography of good food has never been broader. So, my hypothesis that led to this entire podcast episode, basically because I wanted to investigate whether I was right. I mean, it's true. You know it anecdotally. Think about when you travel, how much better food you're able to get in random places that you would have never thought 10 years ago would have a food scene. So let's recap the drivers, right? Cultural exposure. Number one, everyone now knows what good food looks like because of the internet and social media. Number two, talent diffusion. Chefs have moved home or to smaller markets. Number three, local supply chains. Fresh local ingredients have become way more widely available. Number four, migration and income. Remote work spread wealth into new regions and gave people the ability, high earners, the ability to live pretty much anywhere. And then food is an identity. Cities and people use food to define themselves, and no city wants to be known as the one with a crappy food scene. So add all that up, and the result is a landscape where every city from Salem, Oregon to Savannah, Georgia, I've name dropped them twice just because I had such good food when I was there, but they all have the ingredients for a legitimate food scene these days. And if you think about that, that democratization of food mirrors some broader economic trends. 50 years ago, I wasn't around, but I've read a few books in my day. You had to live in a big city to access the best of everything: education, jobs, art, food. And now some of that quality has dispersed. Technology helped flatten access to these things. Now, with that said, you're still going to have more opportunity in a big city. I live in the biggest of them all, New York. Everything is going to be at your fingertips somewhere like that, but you're not as cut off from everything if you live in a smaller city. And that's good for these communities. It's good for small business owners and for cities like Salem that can now attract and retain talent through being able to live a cool lifestyle as opposed to just offering higher wages. Because I mean, I've heard like my dad, he went and worked, I forget where it was, but he got some job offer in some frankly crappy city. I'm not going to name it because that's not cool, but it was basically the only incentive was like, if you go here, you can make a lot of money. And now when you get an offer somewhere like that, maybe if the city might have a cool food scene today or a cool brewery scene that it didn't have 50 years ago. So it makes people more likely to do things that further their career because they don't have to make massive lifestyle sacrifices to do so. And this is also a reminder that investing in a place, we invest in real estate, but investing in a city or neighborhood isn't just about infrastructure or real estate. It's about the experience of the neighborhood. A great restaurant can have more economic ripple in some cases than a new office building. And there's a quote from you guys know how big a Anthony Bourdain fan I am. His quote says, "Good food is very often, even most often, simple food. And that applies to cities too. They're not, the best cities aren't over engineered. They're authentic. That's why people love Europe, right? Europe isn't convenient. They don't have air conditioning half the places, but it just feels so raw and authentic. They let the local characters shine through, whether it's a diner, a bar, or a bistro tucked in a little alleyway. If you've ever been to Paris, exactly what I'm talking about. The city's just oozing with character. And that's what's starting to happen everywhere right now. The line between food capitals and everywhere else still exists, but it's disappearing. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. And so when you think about somewhere like Salem, it's easy to see how this story fits into the broader economic picture. People want to live there, not just because of affordability, but because of quality of life. And being able to go out to a cool meal is a huge part of that. And 10 years from now, the next wave of cities might go the same direction. I mean, think of even more tertiary cities, and it's starting to happen. I even think of places, you go to like Independence, which is a suburb of Salem, or like a Silverton. It's already happening. These are tiny towns, but it's going to keep happening, I think. And the story will be the same, where talent moved in, culture followed in the form of food, and the local economy rose with it. Everywhere became a food city. And I think we might just be getting started. That is a wrap for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Saucetown Investor. If you got value from this, drop us a comment and let us know your thoughts. Did you have a big takeaway? Is there a topic you want to see us cover next time? Is there a guest you want to see interviewed? DMs are open. Business is at Saucetown Properties, and my personal, you can DM me personally, is at The Real Matt Cox 4. We'd also like to ask you kindly to please like and subscribe. You can also follow along with the Saucetown Investor blog. That's mattcox444.substack.com. Thanks again, guys, and until next time, keep investing and stay saucy, Saucetown.